I would encourage everyone to have a seat, because we're going to start our next panel. So, hello and welcome everyone joining us both in person and online. The topic of our next panel discussion is the dangers of developing gender ideology in US and EU social policy. Let me, at the beginning, introduce our distinguished panelists, and after that, we will start with a few remarks from my side, after which we'll go to the discussion, hopefully fruitful and interesting for all the audience. So, let me introduce and invite Mr. Ed Martin, who is the president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, the first pro-family organization founded in 1974, a lawyer and bioethicist. Ed is the author and the editor of 8 books, including the New York Times bestseller, The Conservative Case for Trump. In 1997, Ed was appointed by Pope John Paul II as the youngest participant in the Synod of Bishops of America. Ed is an advisor to President Trump and lives in Virginia with his wife and 4 children. Our second panelist is Professor Frank Furedi, who is an executive director at the MCC Brussels and former professor of sociology at the University of Kent. He is well known for his work on sociology of fear, education, therapy culture, sociology of knowledge, and what is called paranoid parenting. He was once the most widely cited sociologist in the UK press. He's the author of numerous books, the most recent of which is The War Against the Past, Where the West Must Fight for Its History. Professor Furedi. Our third panelist is Rodrigo Ballester, who is the head of the Center for European Studies at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium in Budapest. He's a former EU official. He spent 16 years in Brussels, both in the European Parliament and the European Commission, notably as a member of staff of the Hungarian Commissioner. Since 2010, he's a visiting professor at the Institut d'études politiques de Paris, where he teaches European law. Mr. Ballester. And our fourth panelist is Mr. Marek Nowak, who is International Director at the Ladislav Hanus Institute in Slovakia. Mr. Nowak is responsible for political events and projects and international relationships. He's also responsible for organizing annual conservative summit in Slovakia that gathers prominent conservative intellectuals and public figures. Mr. Nowak. So as I said, we start with a few introductory remarks from my side, after which we'll go to discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, the reason we have chosen to discuss this topic during today's seminar is that gender ideology and more broadly woke movement are at the center of the debate over basic, natural and inalienable rights and freedoms, which form the cornerstone of democratic values and the rule of law. To be more precise, the woke movement represents the most important threat to these inalienable rights and freedoms. So, what is woke movement? The terminology derives from the idea of having been awakened to an awareness of the allegedly systemic nature of racism, sexism, heteronormativity and other oppressive power dynamics, and the true nature of privilege, domination, and marginalization in society. In a nutshell, its worldview emerged from a fusion of critical theory, postmodernism, and identity politics, which elevates identity groups, especially those built on race, sex, and sexuality, to a near sacred status, treating them at the same time as the new proletariat and a tool for challenging the established principles of social life, as openly discussed by Herbert Marcuse, among others. Wokeism undermines or aggressively attacks the foundational principles of Western civilization. First of all, it attacks the essential tools for understanding the world: reason, philosophy, logic, and empirical science. It also views the, quote, impartiality of law, objectivity, colorblindness, and meritocracy, unquote, as instruments of dominant groups, calling instead for an emphasis on subjectivity. The underlying belief is that modern science is inherently racist, patriarchal, and colonial, and as such serves as a mechanism of human oppression. Just one example. According to guidelines for teachers included in official mathematics curriculum framework in California, pointing out students' mistakes and attempting to obtain the correct answer are considered forms of white supremacy. Secondly, it attacks the family and all norms regarding sexuality. For instance, Black Lives Matter stated on its website, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure." Queer theorists openly declare their aim to, quote, deconstruct and destabilize categories of gender and sexuality. In this sense, wokeism extends the legacy of the sexual revolution. Thirdly, as pointed out by one of the founders of critical race theory, Professor Richard Delgado, wokeism attacks the very foundation of the liberal order, including the theory of equality, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, neutral principles of constitutional law, and the concept of the rule of law. Interestingly, woke is often referred to as a secular orthodoxy. However, it seems that it is far from being secular. On the contrary, with its new value system, new virtues and saints, as well as new wishes and sins, it should be recognized as a belief system. And it is a particularly toxic and destructive belief system, whose dogmas are radically opposed to obvious, basic, everyday truths. As a belief system, or quasi-religion, it has its own denominations, like queer theory, post-colonial theory, certain types of feminism and critical race theory. Among those denominations is gender ideology. At the heart of the gender ideology are radical ideas about human person. In particular, that people are what they claim to be, regardless of contrary evidence. A transgender boy is a boy, not merely a girl who identifies as a boy. You can ask, why do our feelings determine reality on the question of sex, but on little else? Our feelings determine our age, or our feelings don't determine our age or our height. Gender ideology is full of contradictions. For instance, if gender is a social construct, how can gender identity be innate and immutable? How can one's identity with respect to a social construct be determined by biology in the womb? How can one's identity be unchangeable with respect to an ever-changing social construct? Due to its radical detachment from obvious, basic, everyday truths, gender ideology, like the entire woke movement, requires constant artificial reinforcement. A vast apparatus is needed to hammer into people's mind that a union between two men is a marriage, and that gender is a subjective state. These are not ideas that develop naturally, or organically, or spontaneously. They don't stem from the shared experience of all cultures, natures, or languages. On the contrary, they are imposed from above through universities, courts, international organizations, the media, and corporations. Those who dare to question the tenets of wokeism, such as a trans woman is a woman, or who fail to use preferred pronouns, are treated as modern-day heretics, deserving to be cancelled on social media, fired from their jobs, or even investigated by the police. The dangers of embodying this belief system into US and EU social policy are the issues we will be discussing during this panel. As I already introduced to you our panelists, I would like to go straight to our discussion. And let me start with Ed Martin from United States. Ed, you worked with Phyllis Schlafly very closely for a number of years. And she's famous for opposing the movement that was based on rhetoric of rights and freedoms, even human rights. Could you tell us something about what are the impacts of that kind of rhetoric? What are the strategies that the political left is undertaken today and in the past?
In the early 1970s, the United States House passed the Equal Rights Amendment. And in order to have an amendment to the US Constitution, one of the ways is for the House and Senate to pass an amendment by 2/3 majority. So the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA is what I'll call it for this discussion, passed 254 to 23, almost unanimous in the House. I think it was 84 to 8 in the Senate. And then it went to the states, and within 12 months, 30 of the 50 states had passed it at the state level. You needed 36. At that point, the whole country was for Equal Rights Amendment. Equal Rights Amendment's only 24 words. The equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any states, here it is, quote, on account of sex. So if Equal Rights Amendment had passed into the Constitution, you would have not been able to ever discriminate in America on account of sex. Not even the word gender, it was sex at this time, 1970. Because it passed, like the EU, the 267 amendments passed unanimously there, but almost unanimously, no one knew to oppose it except Phyllis Schlafly and then a band of mostly sisters, moms and wives, and then men too, and they opposed it. And the pro-family movement in America was launched in the 1970s because of the opposition to the ERA. So one thing to encourage you all is the opposition to these amendments can be an organizing principle. Phyllis Schlafly realized that you could organize against something dramatically, but she won against all odds. 1979, the ERA expired. There was a time limit on it. They desperately wanted to change it, so they extended the limit 2 years. Then it expired, and they didn't get it. And so the Equal Rights Amendment died, but the movement, back to Raphael's point, the movement for rights accelerated in different ways. And in America, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, ultimately the transgender rights movement, but the left decided instead of focusing on an amendment, they would sort of fight smaller battles in different venues to achieve the goal that they wanted. So there's lots of discussion on why they did this. You know, what is the underlying as Raphael referenced, anti-family, you know, anti-human nature, you know, communism. But I just want to comment on 3 areas in America that we have seen to this day. We see where the left is fighting us. One is in government and the law. When the Supreme Court was liberal and would come up with human rights out of the air, a right to abortion, a right to marry, men to marry, Obergefell. When the Supreme Court was favorable to the left, the Supreme Court was a holy and wonderful place. In the last 3 years, as the Supreme Court has become more conservative on abortion, on other issues, you're now seeing an attack on the courts by the left and trying to destabilize the courts. So my point is only to see in America, especially the courts are used against conservatives, against the people, until it's inconvenient, and then they will shift away from it. Now the rhetoric from the left is we have to get control of the federal Congress in order to pass these laws and back towards using the Congress. The second area is the culture. In America, and I have another book, by the way, on the platform of parties. Each of the political parties has a platform and how they change the platform. But the culture of our nation, systematically, the women's rights movement and the gay rights movement targeted the culture. The churches, the mainline Protestant churches in America, the Catholic Church in America, they were targeted by the left over time to shift. One of the ways the churches were targeted was the education system. The Catholic education system in America was second to none in the history of humanity, even other nations. It was nothing like what happened in America, and it was targeted by the left. And by the time you're done, there's very few Catholic higher education or below that are effectively holding the line on these issues. And so I encourage you to the cultural fight included a specific targeting of entertainment. So that in the 1990s and 2000s, the gay rights movement had people placed in all of the Hollywood studios and all of the TV shows, all of the movies, pursuing their agenda, saying you have to have this, you have to have the depiction of homosexuality and all. And it was a tactic. It was not a thing, not an accident, not a preference. It was a tactic. And the last thing I would say in America now, and this, we're all in this together, is the power of the media, and especially social media, to utilize the technology to brainwash and rewire our people against us on these issues. It can't be understated. In America, we see it so regularly, and so the human rights fight that Phyllis started was a constitutional fight. Then it became a states and courts fight, but it has become a broader cultural fight right now that is ongoing, and there is great success in the energy, but there's not enough success in the policy fight.
Thank you very much. Definitely, United States are leading in spreading wokeism and gender ideology, but it seems that they do it hand in hand with European Union, which is the second bastion of promoting that belief system. So let's move to European Union, and that's why I would like to ask Mr. Ballaster. You have a huge experience in working in European Union. Could you share with us some thoughts about what's the role of European Union in spreading this belief system?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the event, also for the report that you did on sovereignty, where you are really like analyzing almost one by one all those amendments. And I think Jerzy, that calls also for a response. Let's hope that one day, soon, maybe in the next 12 months, we can also put like a counter-proposal on the table where we can say things like family doesn't belong to you, European Union, or where we can say things like we love unanimity, the more the better, for example. And so, yes, let me just correct you on a little thing. I am no longer teaching at Sciences Po Paris for the simple reason that I have been cancelled 1 year after joining MCC Brussels. So that's c'est la vie. And when I see what this institution became, I'm pretty relieved about it. And yes, I spend a lot of time in Brussels, and it's true that, you know, sometimes people have the impression that wokeism is a bit of a nebulous and a very vague concept. You define it extremely well, but then you said, okay, but it doesn't happen. 2 weeks ago, I was interviewed by a Dutch journalist from a very big Dutch magazine, apparently. I never read it, but it's apparently very big. And the guy said, but what is wokeism? And I had to explain him. And then he said, yeah, but those are just... it's just a little trend, and this is just like in the fringes of society. I said, no. You know, when, for example, today in the European Union, you have a country like Hungary that has been, to which, you know, some billions have been confiscated for a lot of reasons. Of course, you can invent as many reasons as you like, but one of them is because in Hungary, they have a law that prohibits gender theory for minors. And this is costing billions of euros to this country. So when you get to this level, indeed, no one can say that this is only an anecdote. And let me give you very concrete examples, and you will even find some of the jargon that Rafael mentioned, and that doesn't say a lot because it's just like jargon, but you can find it in a lot of official documents. So I'm not going to speak here about the European Parliament because I think it's beyond any rational analysis. But let me give you some examples of the European Commission, texts adopted by the European Commission, by the College of Commissioners. Look, for example, at their LGBTIQ strategy. Only the cover page is already a poem, a woke poem. And it's difficult for me not to select more than two. I have 2 quotes. It could have been 25. But look, please listen to that. At some point, the Commission says the Commission will foster best practice exchanges between member states on how to put in place accessible legal gender recognition legislation. And even worse, and procedures based on the principle of self-determination without age restrictions. Self-determination without age restrictions. Well, the problem with self-determination without age restrictions is that they often end up in double mastectomies, in phalloplasties and vaginoplastias for minors. So you have lost vulnerable teenagers, depressed teenagers, 14, 15, 16, 17, if not younger, because sometimes those barbarian things have been applied even to children, who just have the possibility to mutilate themselves forever. And the European Commission is supporting that. Self-determination of gender without age restriction has a very specific meaning. They also say that women or men are heterogeneous categories, including in relation to their sex, gender identity, gender expression, or sex characteristics. So first of all, I guess like only 5% of my former colleagues can make the difference between gender identity and gender expression. And second, again, we are here, the European Commission, just questioning one of the most basic facts of mankind, that women are women and men are men. At least, you know, the Commission didn't cross a little step, which is to call women menstruators, for example. That they didn't do. Maybe with the next Commission, they are starting in 1 month. Look at the anti-racist plan of 2020 as well. And there, that's a poem that can even be, you know, like, I mean, it sounds like very American for the reasons that you will see now. They say, for example, only 3 quotes out of 100. We will improve education and knowledge on the historical, cultural causes of racism. We will tackle unconscious bias. Sorry for the translations, it must be dramatic for you to translate unconscious bias in Polish that exists, so unconscious bias that exists in people, institutions, and even algorithms. Even algorithms. So unconscious bias, just for you to know, is the fact that we white people we are racist even if we don't know that we are racist, even if we don't even notice that. There is always a leftist sociologist, sorry for the sociologist, that is going to tell us that we are racist because we are white. A type of capital sin, if you want, a woke capital sin. Next quote, the fight against discrimination on specific grounds and their intersections with other grounds of discrimination is integrated into all policies, legislations, and funding programs. And that has been translated into legislation. This is the last example I'm going to give you. Last one, the conflict between our values of equality and the reality of ingrained racism cannot be ignored, especially for you. The global Black Lives Matter movement has acted as a stark reminder. So you mentioned Black Lives Matter in your introduction. Rafael, you basically did some plagiarism of the European Commission, because so do them. And we might say, okay, those are only speeches that they write in documents that no one reads. Not true. And now comes, I think, the best example of it. There is an EU regulation, so we're speaking now about hard law, something that is compulsory, that is legally binding. On finance, on funds, it's common provision. It's called the Common Provisions Regulation. It's from 2021. It's basically something extremely technical. It's a legislation of 548 pages. 548 pages. And suddenly, and so basically it says how European money should be spent on a lot of funds. I spare you the technical details. And if you dig into it, in Article 9, paragraph 2, so one paragraph among 1,000, you find the following. And this one I already gave it to the translators because otherwise it's impossible. Member States and the Commission shall ensure that equality between men and women, gender mainstreaming, and the integration of a gender perspective are taken into account and promoted throughout the preparation, implementation, monitoring, reporting, and evaluation of programs. So it means that every time you spend European money, you have to make sure that equality between men and women, gender mainstreaming, and a gender perspective. So if somebody can make the difference between a gender perspective and a gender mainstreaming, please enlighten me. But again, this is like a cultic jargon. Huh? And it's not only in the papers that no one reads, it is in the legislation. And the legislation gives a lot of power as well to the bureaucrats in order to launch an infringement against Hungary, for example. And one of the reasons why they also are confiscating money to Hungary now is this article, because they say, a lot of your projects do not comply with the common provisions. So what I want to say here is two things. First, it's a reality. What you describe is not a philosophical fight. This is the way the EU is spending billions of euros or using the budget as a political/ideological weapon. But before we ask ourselves that question, me as a lawyer, I have another question. It's like, whether you like gender or not, I don't. I really don't. But my first question is it the EU's business or not? Is it the EU competence or not? And watch out here, because you also have a very worrying trend, is that in the name of morals, in the name of values, what they call values, suddenly they have legal competences. Because here the legal answer should be, look, it's not even your competence. It is none of your business. Why are you even writing a paper on that? Why do you have this Article 9.2? Because at the end of the day, families, policies and stuff is only national. And me as a lawyer, there's one principle of the treaty that I like very much. My favorite article of the Treaty of the European Union and the functioning of the European Union is Article 5. It's subsidiarity. But there's even one that is even clearer that says very, very straightforwardly that whatever has not been given with a concrete mandate to the EU remains the competence of the member state. For me, this is like the golden rule. It is like saying that football is played with the feet and not with the hands. And still, this is one golden rule that is totally, largely ignored in the European Union, sometimes, often in the name of the rule of law. So the problem here is that it really geared up this process. And now we passed the threshold wherein the European Union changed and weaponized the budget for ideological reasons. If the EU is confiscating money because they want to tackle fraud, I'm fine with that. Corruption, more transparency, why not? But if the minute you are using it to tell to the Hungarian children about their sexual education, then all the red flags and all the red lines have been crossed. And this is what is technically, legally, politically happen as we speak. So watch out. This is no longer a discussion for intellectuals or philosophers. This is really, it became today, like an ideology that is pushed with a financial weapon on member states. Most of the member states are happy with it. They don't care. They are happy. Now, as you also in Poland, I mean, the concept of the rule of law is nothing but a political weapon as well. They confiscated 139 billion euro to you, and they drafted thousands of pages to justify their decision, and at the end, you all found out that it was about a change of government. And the minute your government changed, 3 months later, the money was flowing. And so today, it's only about Hungary. And that's why, no one really cares. But basically, under the excuse of gender ideology and of those values, you have created a Leviathan, an EU-like centralist superpower that is using the money, the common money, as an ideological weapon. And they're pushing that to circumstances that you don't even suspect. These ones, for example. But again, when you might not know, but Hungarian universities have been kicked out from Erasmus. Erasmus is the sacred cow, is the country, the program that has never been politicized. I mean, Russian students today are eligible under Erasmus. No? Iranian students are eligible under Erasmus. Everyone is but the Hungarians. So when you reach this level of sectarianism and autocracy, indeed, I came to the conclusion that the place where I used to work now became a financial autocratic regime.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughts. And very detailed examples, very concrete examples. If I may, I would like the reality that the EU also heavily funds LGBT organizations, that it not only funds the policy that is full of LGBT agenda or gender ideology, but it also funds the organizations that promote that agenda and influence European Union. So those are, to some extent, technical aspects. It shows how it operates. But what are the results? What is the impact of that kind of policies on ordinary citizens, people, on families, on human dignity, individual freedoms, parental rights? Those questions are of the most importance, and that's what I would like to ask Professor Freddy. Would you like to elaborate a little bit about the impact of that kind of policies?
I would, but before that, I just want to make one little brief remark. The reason why we're losing the culture wars, and we are losing it, is because for a very, very long time we imagined that the problem was just the universities, or the problem was just a bunch of hippies in New York. And we never realized that the real problem are the people on top. Because in many, many respects, what we call woke ideology is as much coming down from above as from university common rooms. And if you don't get that, then you will not understand why the other week, the Archbishop of Canterbury in England decided that the word church should not be used anymore because it's too old-fashioned, and we need a new word. I don't know I don't know what the church will be called, but probably it will be it or they or them. But the interesting thing is that so many of the initiatives on family, on gender, are accepted and internalized and then ideologically promoted by even conservative governments. In Britain, for example, it was under the Tories that these ideology gained a legal manifestation. And it seems to me the really important thing to understand what's happening with the laws that are being passed is that surreptitiously the family itself becomes targeted. So in European social policy, if you look at the documents that Rodrigo referred to, in the documents, there's a lot that they say about the need to protect women, the wives in the family from male violence. There's a lot they say about the need to sort of help child poverty. And there's a lot they say about the need to prevent child abuse. Husbands are never mentioned, but that's cool, I understand that. Apparently they're so powerful they don't need any help from the EU. But what they are really getting at by talking about the woman, the child, is to disaggregate the family into different individual units. So it's not a family policy as such, but it's a policy that's designed to intervene within the family, to protect women from husbands, children from parents. Its real aim is to corrode the very meaning of that intimate relationship that families have with one another. And when you look deeper and you look at the way these policies work out, these sentiments are continually underpinned by culture. So the kind of cultural ideals you're talking about are continually there. So you watch a Netflix TV program, and invariably you have a violent father, a woman that needs to be protected from the man, children who are being neglected. And it's very difficult these days to find a description of a family that's nice. I mean, how many films have you seen where there's a lovely father and a nice mother, they're sitting around the supper table, they're being really, really intimately wonderful with each other? You don't see that at all. And in my field in sociology, I became aware of that because I realized, I was finishing a book, and I had this light bulb moment where I realized that there isn't a single book published on the family by sociologists, not since Bridget Berger wrote a book, which actually said good things about the family. I mean, every book that's published is about the problem family. You know, it's like, imagine you go to university, you study the family, and there's not a good word about it. I mean, it's like, you would think that this is like the gulag, where we're all kind of imprisoned in. That's the way it's kind of generally kind of represented. So it's not surprising that a lot of people, a lot of young people growing up in Europe, do not want to be enthusiastically members of a family. So many young kids are saying, we don't want children, because the family itself doesn't have that kind of positive connotation that it has for us. But there's also another element, and this is where gender ideology intertwines here. One of the important things about gender ideology is that it not only corrodes the family, but its explicit aim is to distance the younger generation from their parents. So if you look at the sexuality education curriculum, which the EU is promoting all over Europe, one of the first things they will tell you in this sexuality education, and it's got three parts. One is for 6 to 9-year-olds, then 13 to 15-year-olds, and then to the older teenagers. The first thing it says, that children are never too young to learn about sex. I mean, basically, what it's really saying is that before we teach them how to read, before we teach them mathematics, they've got to know about their sexuality. I mean, these are 4 or 5-year-old kids who aren't exactly in the business of wanting to know about their sexuality, but will shove it down their throat. So you get to the age of 6 and 7, and the curriculum says, your views about sex may well be different to those of your parents and your grandparents. Believe in yourself and believe in what your teachers tell you. So basically, they're telling the kids that we know better than mom and dad and grandma and grandpa how to think about sex relationships between boys and girls. We're going to basically tell you the truth, and then maybe you can educate your parents. There's a kind of distancing of generation that is going on all the time. And that distancing of generations takes a all kinds of weird forms. So one of the things, I just finished a book called The War Against the Past. And one of the things I was looking at is the way in which gender ideology is implicated in rendering toxic the legacy of Western civilization, that everything that's gone on beforehand. And at first, I couldn't understand why it's done so systematically. And then I realized that one of the important dimensions of gender ideology is to essentially dispossess young people of their cultural heritage. Basically, if you tell young people that everything that's gone on beforehand is wrong, is contaminated, the history of the West is a story of shame, then it's very difficult for young people to feel proud about their parents, grandparents, or their ancestors. And they're doing this systematically. So just to give you an example, what gender ideology does is to queer history. It's a lovely term, queer history. And what queering history basically means is rewriting history in such a way that the good guys are the ones with the pronouns, and the bad guys are the ones that are men and women, in one way or the other. So they go so far as to look at, they go back all the way to the beginning of Western civilization, and they say, look at ancient Egypt. Now, in ancient Egypt, when we look at it, we sometimes find human remains. Sometimes archaeologists go to Egypt and they find bones, and we now have DNA tests, so we can tell if that person is a man or a woman. That's what DNA does. They basically say that it is wrong for archaeologists to kind of say that this human remains is that of a man or that of a woman, because how do we know how they would have identified? So just think about it, right? Can you imagine the pharaohs, sort of using their pronouns, and can you imagine, sort of Cleopatra saying, I identify as, sort of. And what they're doing is they're going through every single chapter in our civilization and gendering it and queering it to the point at which every strong woman that ever existed, every queen, or Joan of Arc, or Queen Elizabeth in England, who's ever existed, they basically put a question mark about her sexuality. Because Joan of Arc must have been trans, because she must have been trans because she had a sword, and that indicates, sort of gender fluidity. Queen Elizabeth was one of the strongest queens of England, not the last one, but the first one, must have been either a lesbian or at least was ambivalent about her sexuality because she was so powerful and so strong. And, we can laugh at this, but what they're doing is they're systematically indoctrinating the younger generations to basically perceive themselves as not the inheritors of a wonderful culture and legacy, but essentially as a generation that must take a stand against their own parents, grandparents, and civilization. And that's why I think that gender ideology has become so insidious. And my job in MCC Brussels is to fight against this, but my fight is essentially one that is directed at the cultural elites of European society who are complicit in normalizing this, who basically are complicit in essentially destroying our very humanity, because that's what we're talking about, the most foundational principles of humanity, which is the distinction between men and women. That biological distinction is being corrupted to the point that there's a whole generation of children, not one generation, I think we lost 3 generations of young people in Europe to this ideology, because this is what's being promoted in schools. When you lose 3 generations of young people to them, we're in trouble. We're in big trouble. And our goal has got to be is to make sure that we don't lose another generation to them.
Thank you very much. I think that it follows from what you said, what follows from what you said is that we're witnessing a new morality. I mean, creating a new morality, new set of dogmas that cannot be questioned. I mean, those ideas are so extreme, so out of touch with the everyday citizen, what everyday citizen experience, is that they need to be imposed. They need to be some external force that impose them on ordinary citizens. So that's why that leads us to another aspect of those topics, namely the erosion of liberal system. And one of the aspects of the erosion of liberal system is erosion of freedom of speech. Without freedom of speech, without vibrant discussion, we cannot challenge that kind of ideology. So, Marek, could you elaborate a little bit about that aspect of that phenomena that we're discussing here?
Thank you very much, Rafał. At first, I would like also to thank you, Ordo, Iuris, and Heritage, for enhancing actually the hope that in the future it can be different, and not every US embassy around the world, not the main bastions of European Union in Brussels will be bastions of woke ideology, global woke ideology. So thank you for this hope. Thank you for helping to create international alliance to combat these challenges. So I would like to speak about the freedom of thinking and freedom of speaking. They are among the fundamental rights guaranteed in national, European, international law, traditions, and the core of the culture of the Western world, core of its identity. It also helped become the Western culture the most powerful, the best. That's how we arrived to that point. So freedom of speech is also important tool of feedback in healthy society to keep it not coming to the extremes of any kind. And limiting freedom of speech is like limiting oxygen to the human or to the other species. Eventual regulations in freedom of speech should be possible only on the national level based on the democratic consensus of citizens, but not from the international or supranational institutions. What we see today is actually a huge confusion between dogmas and discussions. So in this brave new world religion, as we can put for the wokeism, neo-Marxism, progressivism, is that they are confusing these traditional dogmas for us as a conservatives, for instance, family as a union between man and woman, that father is a man, mother is a woman, and that family is the harmonical family is the best place to raise the kids. These are our dogmas on the true nature of a man, of the family, of society. And it's not only the question of tradition, it's also the question of the reason, of the common sense, and also of our faith. So these basements are crucial for us. What is different in wokeism? They are trying to eliminate these dogmas and put their discussion. So they question the gender, they question the nature of man, on family, on society. They question it everything, and they create the new dogmas. And about these new dogmas, it's not possible to have a free discussion. Remember that for the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, for example, their approach to the science was not to ignore the science, but to abuse the science, to abuse the reason. The same goes for wokeism. I would like to add 5 concrete examples how the freedom of speech is under the attack of wokeism. So the first one we already mentioned is the question of the true man, true character of man, family, society, and basic fundamental rights, God, nation, family. What they are trying, for instance, if you check the question of homosexuality, they are saying sexual orientation is not possible to change. It's a dogma for them. But they are saying that the gender identity is possible to change. In reality, it's the vice versa. Sexual orientation through the will of the man can be also quite fluid during the life, right? You have these examples of former practicing homosexuals changing their lifestyle, having natural families now. These people hate these examples. We have concrete examples inviting these kind of testimonies to Slovakia. This is the most provocative for them to see that their dogmas are not real, that people can work with their sexual orientation if they want, of course. But the thing which is stable, like if you are born as a man or as a woman, they are trying to explain that it can be changed, it can be fluid, which is not real. So the second one, remember pandemic. What happened during the pandemic? There was since the start, if you remember the letter in Lancet, the scientific magazine in the United States, they put it, the people actually behind all this strange research of gain of functions from US and from China, these scientists put it very clearly, like, don't question the origin of that virus because it's natural origin from the wet market in Wuhan, and then now this is the only possibility, and now we should focus only on the one possibility of the how to solve it with mass vaccination, for instance. Yeah. So actually, at this kind of topic, discussion to have relevant hypotheses how to solve this huge problem, global problem of pandemic was eliminated, and the people who were trying to open these questions were dissidents actually at the time. So they created the new dogma and they limited the healthy discussions. Because of course we can have discussions about everything, about flat earth, but is it fruitful to have discussion about flat earth? It's not fruitful. It's also not fruitful to have discussion about if man is a man and woman is a woman. It's not fruitful, but it's for sure fruitful to have discussion how to solve pandemic, what was the origin of pandemic, and what should be the tools to solve the pandemic. Another example is green ideology. There is a dogma, a new dogma. There is a carbon dioxide is doing everything to destroy our environment. So limiting carbon dioxide for every cost will save our planet. So this is the dogma, and everybody, the scientists who are saying that, okay, maybe it's causing something, but there are also other causes, I don't know, cyclic environment in the universe and so on, many hypotheses, they are limited. So all the funding for the funding schemes from the grants, science is actually very ideological today. So if you are not like mainstream scientists focused on the environment, most probably you will not receive some European funding for your environmental research. So that's another problem. They limited discussion where there should be discussion. And they created the new dogma of carbon dioxide. Another example is war on Ukraine, unfortunately. It's a horrible thing, but I would just put example from recent JD Vance talks about the solutions, how to solve the Ukraine in a European context or in Central European context. Slovak person with these opinions will be put by mainstream media as Putin's or Russian agent, right? So again, we have some causes, some history of that conflict. People from the woke ideology doesn't like to speak about the origins of that conflict, doesn't like to speak about the spectrum of solutions for that. They have only one solution, and they hate to speak how we arrived to that conflict. So again, limiting the important discussion. And the last one is ideological fight against fake news and hoax with ideologically motivated woke fact checkers, which is actually, let's say, like industry. It's the new industry, and it's not fighting only against like the real hoaxes and the, let's say, stupid narratives, but also like putting, for instance, conservative narratives or conservative approaches which are totally legitimate to the extremes of public discourse to eliminate the healthy discussion. So these were the basic five examples from my side.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time. But the closing remarks, the picture that we depicted is quite sad. We have against us institutions, courts, culture. So does that mean that there's no hope for rebuilding common sense, family, culture that allows human being flourish? Is there any chance, any solutions to that sad circumstances? Would you like to share with us some short thoughts about that, since we have literally a few minutes left?
Can I just say one thing, which is the wonderful thing that happened in America was that during COVID, parents began to see what the teachers were telling their kids. And this also happened in England, where a lot of parents have begun to organize, in Scotland in particular, because they realized that kids were being indoctrinated systematically. And I think that the big challenge for us is to organize the parents, because they're invested in the future of their kids. And people like ourselves have got to get down on the ground and do everything possible to make that happen, because there are more parents around than the other side, right? And because they don't have children and everything else, we are in a position where we can influence policy and really hit back.
Just very briefly, I'm glad, because I wanted to say one of the things I meant to touch on was, in America, the rapid deterioration of parents' rights that has happened over the last 25 years, culminating with privacy rights and healthcare rights and all. And it is a big problem, a major problem, that the left used the rights movement. But the good news is, in America, two groups I can mention, Moms for Liberty and Moms for America, where groups have come together and seen something so upsetting that it's become an organizing principle, and a very positive one. The question is, how do we build the momentum for the broader vision of, say, the family, not just protecting the kids? After COVID, we had an influx of parents sending their kids to private schools, to homeschooling, and then about 2 years later, they went back to the public schools because it was more convenient and cheaper and all. So we've got to build on the momentum, but there are positive signs, especially around the most egregious examples of gender ideology that's parents especially have moved to do. And then I would just be remiss if I didn't say, in America, we need Trump. Trump is addressing that fight dramatically as a cultural moment, and we need that in America. I think the world needs it, but I'm a little biased.
Okay, thank you. And next speaker, Rodrigo.
Yeah, very quickly. Yes, there is hope. Yes, there are solutions. Parents are giving, from America mostly, are giving the best examples. They are managing to reverse the trend. There is a guy called Ron DeSantis, which is implementing very clear anti-woke policies. There's a person called Trump. There's a person called Orban Viktor as well. So yes, there is resistance. We have to stop laughing. I know that the examples about trans and wokeism in general are very funny because they are so absurd, but we were laughing for 20 years while they were mutilating children. So let's stop laughing as well. Sovereignty is also an answer. It means that keep those discussions at national level, because here there is an elephant in the room. We know we criticize a lot the European Union. Fair enough. By the way, they opened some disciplinary proceedings against me, so greetings to the human resources of the European Commission. But the elephant in the room is called the UN 2030 agenda. This is the mothership. It all stems from there, and sometimes we just forget to mention it. So keep those discussions at national level, never delegate those things to the regional level, and even less to the UN level.
Okay, thank you. And really last sentence, Mark.
Yes, we should be positive, realistically optimistic, and because of the threat of wokeism is global, our conservative natural order answer should be also global, international, and without having this working conservative ecosystem, we cannot be successful. It's not fight of one or two or three nations, it's fight of the whole lucid world, actually.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have run of time, so please join me and thank our distinguished speaker. Thank you very much.